As we know, the use of components allows us to reuse functionalities that have already been developed. For example, in the case of a web panel like the one we've seen, where the tourist attractions that a travel agency offered to visit were listed. We will not deal here with the design, which can certainly be improved. We're looking at a rather simple screen, which shows a fixed part that comes from the master page and another part of its own. We can filter by country and by name of attraction. However, what matters right now is to note that we've added the possibility of marking tourist attractions as favorites. For example, I'll mark this one and this one. So we've marked two attractions as favorites. However, if we look up here, there's a 0, as if we hadn't marked any of them as favorites. Let's refresh the screen, and now we see a 2. We also want that, if we unmark a favorite attraction, this number is updated to 1. How do we get this value to update automatically, depending on whether a tourist attraction is marked or unmarked as a favorite? Okay, let's introduce the concept of global events. In general, in interactive objects, such as web panel objects, events are actions handled by the program and triggered by the user. Events are usually local to the program in which they're defined. Global events, on the other hand, allow you to define events that apply to all components of an application. While local events are triggered in response to a user action, global events are code that remains inactive until it's invoked from another event, from any other component. In the image displayed, a global event defined in component E could be invoked from component A. Any combination is possible, regardless of the nesting level of the components that make up the screen. Let's go to Genexus to see this web panel. First, it has an associated master page, which is the default. Therefore, the content of its screen will be loaded inside the content placeholder of that master page. In addition, we've added another component to show the total number of tourist attractions that the user has marked as favorites. To save the attractions that a user has marked as favorites, we should have a users table to indicate each user's favorite attractions. If we don't want to work with users yet, for example, because we haven't applied GAM yet, and we're still figuring out if we're going to have our own users table or not, we can temporarily keep favorites per browser instance. To this end, we've created this transaction with this attribute, to which we've specified this new domain that we've also created, with the same data type as this property. Client information is an external object of the Genexus module, whose ID property allows identifying the client device that it's running, both natively and on the web. In the case of web applications, the property returns a user ID, which persists between all sessions with the same browser and for the same application. So what we've done is to add a transaction with a key made up of the device and the tourist attraction. We'll save the favorites in the table associated with this transaction. In the web component being loaded here, we see that it only contains a text block with this name, whose caption is loaded at runtime, only in the start event, invoking this subroutine that first calculates the number of tourist attractions for this client, which are in the table containing these two attributes: favorite, attraction. Here's the value we're looking for. Then we turn that numeric value into a string to assign it to the text block that will be displayed. On the other hand, if we look at what will be loaded in the content placeholder for our web panel, we see that it's a screen with this combo box to choose a country, and below it, we have another component, to which the value of that country is sent every time we modify it. And if we look at what's being loaded in that web component, it's this other web object of the component type, which has a grid that filters the tourist attractions it'll show, according to the country received by parameter and the screen's filters. We've chosen a flex grid, which contains a canvas table in order to overlap the tourist attraction photo with its name, and a Boolean variable to allow the user to mark or unmark the tourist attraction as a favorite. We will not dwell on the design of all this. Just note that in the load event of the grid, which has attraction as its base table, this forEach command is executed for every tourist attraction to be loaded. It searches in the subordinate table, favorite attraction, if there's a record for this device, the one that's running. Once the attractions grid is loaded, when the user clicks on an attraction favorite, we call a procedure that checks whether the attraction was already marked as a favorite. If so, it removes it from the table. And if it's the other way around, it does the opposite. That is, it inserts it. When doing this, the total of favorite attractions should be updated. In other words, we want a user event of a component loaded in this panel to perform an action on a component with which it has no other relationship other than being indirectly involved in the same screen. With this predefined object, global events, so that we can modify it. We could save it under another name and create as many particular objects as we want. In this case, we're going to modify the predefined one, which comes empty, adding an event that we'll call in this way. The events added will be able to handle parameters, if required for communication between components. Here we only need one to find out that another one triggered it. No parameters are needed. Since we have this global form of communication, we're going to use it. Let's go to the panel that should trigger the event. It'll happen every time the variable is clicked on. At that moment, we invoke the global events external object, the only one that's there at the moment. In this way, the triggering of the event is being reported. Then what we need to do is, the component that counts the attractions to show them will subscribe to this event in order to listen to it whenever it takes place. For this, we simply set to listen to the event. And there we program what we want to be executed when the event occurs, which in this case is to recalculate the number of attractions. Let's run this to see this in action. We see that it's refreshing. Now we mark, and mark this other one, and the communication is taking place successfully. Even though here we've seen an example of communication between web panels with components, the same is true for communicating multi-experience panels with components, for example, for native applications. To learn more about this topic, you can visit our wiki.